Welcome to the Dough Roller Money Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Berger. Today, in episode 299, we're going to talk about a very interesting question that a member of the Facebook group asked a couple of weeks ago. And it's a tough one, frankly. It's how do you help a friend with their money when you know they need help, but they don't want your help? What do you do? Do you just watch them suffer? Do you just watch them go from one financial crisis to another? Do you intervene? It's a tough one. And so that's what we're going to cover today. Also, today is my first attempt to actually videotape this podcast. If it works, you'll be able to watch this on YouTube. If it doesn't work, then forget I said anything. We'll see how it goes. So let's get right to it. Jacob is the member of the Facebook group who asked the question. By the way, if you don't know about the Facebook group, it's a group you can join. Go to doughroller.net/Facebook group. We'd love to have you. I don't know how many people are in there now, 4,000 or 5,000. It's basically a small town and a lot of great discussions. And this came up, a couple of weeks ago in a comment, I believe. And so here was the question. I would like a podcast discussing how to get others involved with their finances. I know several people with consumer debt and no savings, but no matter what I seem to say, they don't care. Also, how to get younger people started sooner. Well, it's a great question. Two questions, I guess. And they're not easy. They're tough, in my experience, but I'm going to try to give you my thoughts on it. And if you find yourself in a situation similar to Jacob, hopefully it'll help you. Let me start with the easy question. That is how to get younger people started sooner. I've had the opportunity a couple of different times to do that. Now, it was kind of easy because they came to me. In one case, a real good friend brought his college-age son. They came to the house. We sat down. Long story short, he set up an IRA, or I think it was an IRA or a taxable account at Vanguard. And I think he's just investing in a target date retirement fund. Very easy to do, low cost. And it's funny, every time I see them, which isn't frequently, it's a couple of times a year, he'll always come up to me, hey, here's how my account's doing. Which every time he does, I don't want to burst his bubble, but I say that's terrific. But remember, there will come a time when it goes down. It's not so much being negative, it's just setting the right expectations. Another case, in fact, a good friend who I'm going to mention in a minute, I helped his daughter open up an account. I believe that was at Betterment. And so I've had an opportunity to help young people, college-age people, and I've helped a few others. And of course, I'm working hard to help our own children who are in their 20s. One of the things that I try to tell young folks is that the single biggest asset they have right now is time. If you're 20, 18, 20, 22, 24, you've got a long time, at least before a traditional retirement. And what I show them is, if you save $100 a month or $500 a month or $1,000 a month, and I get that not everyone's in the same place. For some, $1,000 a month is insane. For others, it's not, frankly. But if you do that and you invest it in a low-cost way, here's where you'll be when you retire. Here's where you'll be in 10 years. Forget retirement. Sometimes trying to convince a 22-year-old to do something so that when they're 70, they'll be in good shape is a bit of a challenge. So sometimes it's, hey, here's where you'll be in 10 years, right? But for those of you fairly new to the show, if you save $1,000 a month during your working years, and I know that can be difficult, but let's assume you don't even increase it, right? $1,000 a month 30 years from now, if we assume even modest inflation, will be nothing, right? But if you just stick to $1,000 a month and you earn 8%, you're going to have $3.5 million after 40 years. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate that relationship. It's hard to, figure that out in your mind. That wait a minute, I'm going to invest $1,000 a month, right? It's $12,000 a year, yeah. Over 40 years, that's less than $500,000. It's $480,000, and I'm going to end up with $3.5 million. It just doesn't seem possible, and that's the beauty of compounding. But I try to convey to them just how important time is and how they have it in abundance, unlike some of us. And, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, frankly. There's only so much you can do. Sometimes, and we're going to get into this now with sort of the main part of Jacob's question, but sometimes unfortunately, life experience is the best teacher, and it can be painful. And we've all dealt with that to some degree or another. I've certainly had my share of learning through mistakes and life experiences. But to sort of now address sort of anyway, in terms of younger folks, that's what I try to do. If they want help, I try to get them set up in low-cost index funds directly through Vanguard. Some prefer Betterment, that's fine. I don't just set them up. I try to explain to them the power of compounding and how fees matter, and how even small increases to their savings rate can have a big impact later in life. Most of us don't really appreciate that. So that's what I've tried to do, and it's been successful at least some of the time. So that's good. Now to the tough part. How do you help people that don't want help, right? That you see them, and I have a lot of friends that fall into this category. They are constantly struggling with finances, and they pull into the driveway, or if we're meeting somewhere for dinner, into the parking lot in a $40,000 car. And I just think they're just digging their hole deeper and deeper. In fact, I have two friends I want to tell you about just to kind of get this topic going. The first is, and they have the opposite kind of problem. One is, and they're both close friends of mine, and we talk about money. So this is not like a taboo subject with either of them. And we've talked about the things I'm going to share with you today. The first one is someone who is very well off, a millionaire, not a flashy millionaire. It's sort of the millionaire next door kind of thing. Just, doesn't make what I think most people would consider a millionaire salary, just is consistently saved, done very well from a budgeting perspective, but it's almost to an extreme. There's something in him that hates to spend money. Now, you could say that's a good problem, and I think to some extent it is, but it can lead him to some crazy, I think, crazy decisions. We had breakfast the other day with my wife and his wife, and his wife ordered coffee, cup of coffee. It was, all right. He got water. Okay, good. But it was one of those restaurants where they bring the pitcher of coffee to your table, and after his wife had her cup of coffee, sure enough, the cup sort of started to migrate over to his side of the table, and he poured a cup, and he's drinking, and he's doing it to save money. And it drives me crazy. It's like, what are you doing? And we talk about this, and he laughs. I know, that's how I am. No, it's not good. That's a problem. That's a life-controlling problem. But it doesn't, financially they're fine, right? Because he doesn't order cups of coffee. He's fine, except that at some point you ask yourself, what's the point of it all? Anyway, that's sort of the extreme saver, I guess. The other friend that comes to mind, a really good friend, love him to death, and he's the opposite. He spends everything he makes, and he makes a lot of money. His family, I don't know what they're going to make this year. I would say mid-six figures, and they're going to spend it all. And he has 2 cars. His wife has 2 cars. It's just, he just spends money. And we talk about it. Again, money is not taboo with either of these friends. We talk about how he's spending, and I'll joke. I say, if you didn't spend that money and you put it in a low-cost mutual fund, you know how much you'd have in 10 years? But he doesn't care. It's just, there is nothing that I am going to do or say to change either one of them, frankly. We talk about it now almost as a joke. And so I bring these folks up to give you, for 2 reasons. One, just to give you sort of a feel of the extremes that I've dealt with in my own experience. But also, in response to Jacob's question, I think the very first thing you need to realize is there are some people you're not going to be able to help. It's just the way it is. It's just life. You may want to help them. They may need help. But they're just not going to want your help. Now, there could come a day when that changes, right? They could experience something, in their financial lives where they really need help and they really want help, right? They've hit rock bottom or whatever. You need to be there for them if you can to help them through it. But sort of point one here is some people just don't want your help. And by the way, it's no different than with drug and alcohol addiction. I've had a number of friends and family members who have had drug and alcohol issues. And I've helped some. I've been to AA meetings with friends and family, and it's a difficult situation. I'm sure many of you have either dealt with that. No doubt some of you listening to this have had your own struggles in that regard. what I've found is until they hit rock bottom, there's no helping them. You just, you can be there for them to a degree, but until they want to make changes, the changes aren't going to happen. And I think it's just as true. I think it's just as true with money. And the thing I would add, particularly for the more common problem, I think my friend who doesn't get his own cup of coffee, I don't think that's as common. Maybe it is. I don't think it's as common. I've not experienced it as much as the folks that just can't control their spending. And it's similar to overeating, right? When we eat, whether it's sugar or whatever, fried foods, whatever our craving is, it gives us a momentary sense of satisfaction, right? May last an hour, may last a few hours, may last a day, but it's going to go away. And eventually we're going to need another fix, right? And it's the same thing with spending. We get that new car and, they call it the hedonic treadmill. You get that new car and it feels great. You love it. It actually probably does, if you could measure your level of happiness on a scale of 1 to 10, yeah, maybe it boosts you from a 7 to an 8 or a 9 for a while. But eventually it wears off. And that's true whether it's the next car, the next watch, the next dress, the next house, whatever, the next yacht. I don't know what you crazy people buy. Maybe it's next yacht for some of you. And it makes for an interesting, I think, thought experiment because it raises the question, well, wait a minute. If these things aren't really, in the long term, going to change our fundamental level of happiness, why buy anything? Rob, why do you live in the house you live in? Downsize. I mean, if what you're saying is true, downsize because your fundamental level of happiness isn't going to change. Or, don't drive so nice a car. I drive a Volvo SUV. I think it's nice. Anyway, yeah, I guess, quote unquote, downgrade, which, by the way, I'm seriously thinking of doing, but that's another topic. And those are fair questions. If you were to ask me those questions, I would say, yeah, those are fair questions and things that my wife and I now are considering. But in any event, I think what some people get into this loop of, they need that boost of happiness and they get it from spending. And it's a tough cycle to break. It really is. So I guess point one is you can't help everybody. Ultimately, the only help that's going to be useful is when they ask for it and they're ready to receive it. All right. The second thing I would say is you really got to consider the relationship. So my sense from Jacob is it's friends, right? But sometimes you're dealing with a child, an adult child, in our case, 20-something children. It could be a spouse that's having financial issues. It could be a parent. It could be a coworker. So the relationship matters. And how you're going to try to help that person matters. And the level of resistance that you will fight, I think the relationship matters. I mean, for example, if I saw a coworker in financial dire straits and I offered to help and they said, look, Rob, I appreciate it. I don't want your help. I'm backing off. I'm done. All right. Well, if that changes, let me know. Wish you the best. If my son or daughter said that, I'd say, yeah, too bad. Sit down. We're talking, right? So at least I think I would say that. Our son is kind of big. Yeah, I'd say that. I'd definitely say that. Although eventually, I suppose, I'd throw my hands up in the air, right? But my point is, the relationship we have with the person matters. You're not going to treat everyone the same. And that's certainly true with the spouse, right? In this regard, I would say, though, I think probably the most important thing, particularly when you're dealing with someone close to you, adult child, a spouse, a parent, brother, sister, is, and this is sort of point 3 in my outline, do no harm. I think we can so easily do things that we think are helping the person and they're not. And I'll give you maybe some extreme examples, but I'll talk to parents and they're like, yeah, our son, he doesn't have a job, he's living at home and I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, tell me about it. Well, he's got a car because we're paying for it and we're paying for his insurance. We're paying for his iPhone 10. And I'm like, whoa, slow down there. He's what, 24? I'm making these numbers up. Why are you doing that? You're harming him. You're hurting him. Why are you giving him all of this so he can sit at home and play video games? That's insanity. Now, I will say, particularly as a parent, and fortunately our kids are not in that scenario that I just described. But I know it's very hard. Tough love is not easy for everyone. I don't think it's easy for me. But I think the way to sort of kickstart it is to recognize that you're hurting the person long term. You're not helping. You may be solving sort of an immediate problem and avoiding a difficult conversation, avoiding a difficult circumstance, but you're not helping. My sister has recently told her daughter, my niece, that you got to get a job, and she's graduated from high school. You got to get a job, or you're moving out. And it's tough love, and that's in the long term. It's going to be better for her. That's what you need to do. And ultimately, it could get to the point where you kick them out. You hope it doesn't. You hope that they get a job and get on their feet and move out on their own, and you don't have this sort of bad interaction. But ultimately, that's what you may need to do. So sometimes you help people by not helping them, I guess is what I'm saying, or at least not helping them by giving them stuff. And with friends and more distant family members, you got to be real careful about letting them borrow money. Our general rule has been if we let people borrow money, which we largely do not lend money out, we do it with no expectation of getting it back. And that's to protect the relationship. But even then, like we've turned family members down before, and it's because when you're working with someone or dealing with someone who's sort of consistently in financial crisis and not having a job, giving them money is not going to solve their situation. And you see them going from sort of family member to family member asking for money, and it's just not going to do any good. And so sometimes you need to let them suffer, which sounds harsh to me anyway, but I think it's what you have to do if you really want to help them. So point 3 is do no harm. And again, I think that probably applies mostly with sort of adult children, but it could apply in other circumstances as well. And eventually, and this kind of gets to point 4, people need to ask for help, right? I mean, if you have a relationship where they may not want your help, but they're okay talking about money, that's terrific. But you're not going to be able to really help them until they want the help, right? And so you need to be aware of that and sensitive to the conversations and what they're asking you, perhaps, if it gets to that point. But I think it's a mistake to try to force the help on them. It's going to frustrate you. It's going to frustrate them. It could end a friendship. And at the end of the day, it's probably not going to help. Now, that being said, I think there are some things you can do, kind of subtle things. And that's kind of the next 3 points, final points for the podcast. These next 3 points are things you can, I don't know how subtle they are. Sometimes I think I'm being subtle, and it turns out I'm not. So like with the last podcast, I talked about how I think it's a really bad idea to pay off all your non-mortgage debt before you invest. And someone left, I think it was a Facebook group, said, I was being passive aggressive vis-a-vis Dave Ramsey. And my first thought to that was, I was being passive? I thought I was just aggressive. But yeah, so sometimes I'm not quite as subtle. I didn't mention Dave's name in that podcast, so I thought I was, kind of avoiding the topic. Although I have something good to say about Dave Ramsey. That comes up in a minute. But anyway, I don't know how subtle these are, but, here you go. The first is, I like to ask questions of people. People know what I do, so a lot of times they bring up the question of investing or budgeting or finances in general a lot on their own. But sometimes we're just talking about like buying a car, right? And I'll ask them questions about it, right? They love the car. Here's the car. They put it on Facebook. What it cost. That's usually for a car. That's not too insensitive a question, I don't think, since it's pretty much you can figure it out anyway. And you ask them questions about what it costs, and and maybe I'll ask them about their other cars, and then they start talking. We talk about insurance comes up. Oh, really? What's it cost to insure those cars? Now, I'm not making any judgments. I'm not saying to them, "Oh, that's a mistake. You've made a terrible mistake here." Again, I may not be as subtle as I think I am. But my goal is just to get them to think about these questions, right? Because, sometimes you make decisions in the moment and then later you sort of appreciate the consequences a little bit. At least that's certainly been the case with some decisions I've made in my life. And so sometimes it's just questions. Or, they'll talk about a new job. I got a new job. Oh, that's terrific. Do they have a 401k? Yes, they do. Really? Do they match? Yes, they do. Or sometimes I'll get, I don't know. Gee, I wonder how you'd find out. Again, I'm not pushing them anywhere. I'm just asking questions. Again, I don't know how subtle this is. Or some people will say, yeah, I have a 401k, I invest in it. That's terrific. What do you invest in? I don't know. Okay. I don't even say anything else because I did that the other, maybe a year or two ago, relative. And he came back to me like a week later with a complete list of all of his investments. Here's what I'm invested in. Here are the mutual funds. And I said, oh, that's good. Those are good funds. I wonder what they cost. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Well, they have expense ratios. Do you know what that is? No. So I explain all that to him. So he comes back like a week later. Oh, here's what they cost. They're really cheap. And so it was a good way of, just asking questions. I'm just being curious. So that's one tactic. The second one is recommend some books. Right? Some people may not want to talk about finances. Some people, it's highly personal, whatever. Maybe they're embarrassed about their finances, and it's just fun to find it uncomfortable. So you could recommend a book or even give a book as a gift, right? And there's tons of books you could recommend. Two that come to mind, depends on what their issue is. But my sort of favorite overall be smart with your money book is Your Money or Your Life. And that's the one I would recommend. It's easy to read. It's not highly technical. And I think that's a good one. The other one is The Simple Path to Wealth, which we've talked about on the show before. And I think that's a good one. That gets more into the investing side of things, which I think is good. And in a very simple way, basically low-cost index fund kind of approach. So Your Money or Your Life, The Simple Path to Wealth. Obviously, if they have specific issues, you might think of other books. But in terms of just giving you some general sort of wide-ranging books that cover a wide range of finance topics, those are the two that come to mind that I would recommend. And then the third thing would be, you could recommend podcasts and blogs, right? I mean, folks like to listen to podcasts, at least I'm assuming they do, since you're listening to this one. So obviously, you'd recommend the Dough Roller Money podcast. That's a given, right? But there are others that you might recommend. One I would recommend is Dave Ramsey. I think he is a great motivator, phenomenal motivator. And I agree with 95% of what he says, even though I tend to talk about the other 5%, which is probably a flaw on my part. He's smart with money. His program, the way he deals with money, is spot on. Maybe I think people should invest sooner than he does. Fine. But he is spot on. And the thing I like about his podcast, I don't listen to it regularly. I guess he has a radio show podcast, but it's very motivational because you're getting real people on his show. Some, of course, are asking questions, but others are saying, hey, look, here was my experience. Here were the difficult things that I dealt with. Here's what caused me to hit rock bottom, and today we're debt-free. And then they scream, we're debt-free, or however it works. I think it still works that way. So, recommend the Dave Ramsey podcast. In terms of sites, obviously Dough Roller, right? But three others that I like, Mr. Money Mustache. When I recommend that blog, I do caveat. I say, look, he's extreme. You don't need to be extreme. Most people aren't extreme like Pete is. But you learn a lot. Right? You can take a lot away from his blog. And if you start at the beginning and read it, it's really fun to read. One site that I just learned about today, The Humble Dollar. This site, which is written by, and let me look up his name, but he's a Wall Street Journal columnist or reporter. Forgot how to spell humble. That can't be good. Anyway, it's humbledollar.com. And the gentleman behind it is, why can't I find his name? It's Jonathan. I can't remember. Oh, Jonathan Clements, right. But on the Humble Dollar, one of the things they have are a bunch of guides that sort of walk you through most of the major elements of personal finance and investing. So that would be another one that I think would be good to recommend. And then the third one, and this might be, I don't know, for younger folk, but and it may surprise somebody, it's actually a great resource, and that's Reddit. They have a personal finance, I don't know what they call the things, Reddit, I don't know. But if you Google Reddit personal finance, it is a wealth of information, and I think by and large it's spot on. So, the reason I mention books and then podcasts and blogs is because some folks just may be uncomfortable talking about the topic, right? They don't want to talk to you about it. But you mentioned some of this, they may not go look it up as soon as you mention it or the next week even. But it may be when they forgot about the car insurance bill and it came in and they're not sure how they're going to pay it. They just may remember, what you recommended, and they may go look at it then. And they may be much more comfortable reviewing it, at home or for a podcast in the car. And maybe they'll talk to you about it later down the road. Maybe not, but I think it gives them another way to get good information about managing your money that isn't as intimidating as sort of a one-on-one conversation. So there you go. That is my best attempt to answer what I think is a very difficult question: how to get others motivated about their finances and to help them when they don't really want your help and they don't want motivation. That's a tough one. And so those are the best ideas I could come up with. If you have others, shoot me an email, dr@doorroller.net, or post it in the Facebook group. Again, doorroller.net/Facebook group. Would love to hear from you. By the way, I got an email, and the name, I'll see if I can, I'm not going to be able to find it. So I apologize I don't have the name, but I wanted to mention it to you. Actually, I'm going to pull it up, see if I can find the name. It was in reference to the Binder podcast, the Blue Binder. And no, I'm not going to have it here. But in any event, I remember what the email said, which is the important part. He suggested a couple of other sections to the binder that I wanted to mention to you. One was a section on Social Security, which I think is a great addition. And even if you're not collecting Social Security, you could include your reports that you can get every year or download them from Social Security Administration. That could be really helpful. And then he mentioned that in some cases, if you own a business, you may have an insurance policy that pays out to partner A's family if he dies, and partner B's family if she dies. And the idea behind this policy is, let's say you own a business 50-50 with a partner, and if one of you passes away, you don't want your spouse, your children sort of stepping in. They don't know anything about the business. You just want your partner to own it all, right? Well, that's fine, but shouldn't your family get something? You're not going to give away the business. So what you do is you put in place an insurance policy that basically represents one half of the value of the business. And whichever partner dies first, his beneficiaries, whoever he or she designated, would receive the benefits. And if you have that kind of situation, absolutely, I would include that in the insurance section of the binder. That would be important. But I thought that maybe doesn't apply to everyone. Social Security, I thought that was a great addition to the binder, and I'm going to add it to mine and wanted to pass that on to you. So I do have access to my email again, dr@doorroller.net. So shoot me emails. And of course, you can join the Facebook group, doorroller.net/Facebook group, and join the conversation. Well, there you go. Hope you have a great day and a great week. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.